fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because Michelan Sisti boards the mothership to discuss the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film and Dinosaurs. Special thanks to Coolwaters Productions for making this interview happen. They specialize in celebrity management for the biggest stars in television and film. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars.
Hi, Mr. Sisti. Thank you so much for coming to Versus
Hello,
Stars
Jeff.
podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Nice to meet you.
It's an absolute honor to speak with you. I always start off with the question of inspiration. So inspire your love for film and television and who your earliest influences.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I was a ham as a kid. That's how I got into being an actor to begin with. Um, I guess in some ways, because I used to watch a lot of their films, Chaplin and Buster Keaton were two of my heroes. And in fact, in my early days as an actor, excuse me, I was what you could call a physical actor. I did a lot of physicality with my performances, particularly if they called for it, sometimes when they didn't. So I guess those two would be very great influences for me, for sure.
So you've had a long career with the Jim Henson Company, and we'll go into a little more details later. So how do you get involved with the Jim Henson Company? And as a Muppeteer and puppeteer, how did that translate from your acting to what they wanted with that?
Okay, I got into it by the back door, basically, as far as puppeteering is concerned. I was a New York actor. I was 20 years in New York City, and I had done Broadway shows. I was happy as a clam. That was my dream, my goal. I was going to be in New York for the rest of my life. In 1989, I got another call from my agent at the time saying, do you know anything about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? And I said, no, don't know anything about them. And he didn't either. So he said, go along. So that's what changed everything for me. I be from a New York actor, not born and bred, but certainly that's where I needed to be. Um, I became a turtle, thanks to Steve Barron, God bless him. That changed my life, as I said. Uh, that got me to meet Jim Henson, which is one of the great thrills and privileges of my life. And when we were shooting the first Turtles movie, Jim approached me and said, I have this idea for a TV show I want to do with ABC called Dinosaurs, and I'd like you to be part of that. So between the first and second movie, they asked me back for the second movie. Unfortunately, we lost Jim, so I didn't think that that was going to be a possibility anymore. But during the second Turtles movie, his son Brian approached me and said that they were going to go ahead with this TV show and they would like me to come out and be a part of it. Well, that's what got me out to California from New York. And while I was doing Dinosaurs, whenever I wasn't in a suit, because that's what I did initially, like I did with Michelangelo, I was in the animatronic heads and the suits for Dinosaurs too. But when I wasn't in a suit, oftentimes they would say, here, this puppet, take this puppet, go and get into that scene. So I basically learned on the job. That's how I became a puppeteer. But I had the great advantage of learning from the best in the world at that time. So that's how I backed into becoming a puppeteer. Then they would give me more and more chances to do that. And then when Dinosaurs ended, I was planning on coming back to New York yet again. But they said, no, no, we'd like you to stay out here. So one thing led to another puppeteering gig, another puppeteering gig. Then they got me involved with the Muppets. That led to more puppeteering gigs. And the next 35 years, that's what I've been doing.
That's incredible. And you met one of the people who I would always have loved to have met, which is Jim Henson. He's one of the people you think to yourself, I would love to have interviewed him, given either I had thought about this 35 years older when I was like 10. Um, so what was the man like in real life, in person?
I have often said, and it's actually, for me, it sums it up. He was a light in the world. He brought energies and joy across the globe, regardless of where you live, what languages you speak. He touched everybody that came in contact with his dream, basically. Yeah, I had only a short time with him, unfortunately, but having worked for more than 30 years with people who knew him for 50 years, I've learned an awful lot about the man.
That's incredible. And like I said, and you obviously worked with his son. You said Brian for a while, especially on Dinosaurs. What was he like? What was it like working on once again? Because not only he's the son, but he must have had all that pressure of living up to his father as well. What was that experience like?
He did, and he handled it beautifully. I mean, I first met Brian. He was the second AD, not second AD, second unit director on Turtles 1. So that's where we first met. And then, of course, he was there for Turtles 2 as well, and Dinosaurs, like you say. Brian is a lovely fellow, and you're right. He had a heck of a lot of pressure and weight on his shoulders when his dad passed away. They basically, the story that I've learned over the years was that they came to him, the people who were in control at the moment, and said that if you don't take over the company's going to end.
Mm.
So he took that upon himself. God bless him.
That's incredible. And like I said, you've done all. Like I said, you were Michelangelo in the first two Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. You played Charlene in Dinosaurs. But when you think about from a point of view of an actor, like you said, you're a physical actor, which I'm sure was a huge help to doing this kind of work. Do you call it, is it puppeteering or puppeteering? How do you, what's the word for doing the acting within the suits?
We've tried a couple of different monikers over the years, but basically we started out as body puppeteers, or suit puppeteers, suit actors. But I mean, everybody is collaborating to create the character. So it just became guy in the suit, guy not in the suit, voice.
So I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're in the suit, the face is all animatronic, because that's what it looks like because all the technology that's involved with that. You're obviously wearing a pretty bulky costume in both cases.
Horrible
Um,
costume. Yeah.
so what kind of skills of an actor translate the best to the suit acting?
Okay. Two basic things are at least some understanding of mime and some understanding of mask work. Because when you're in a suit and inside of an animatronic head, or even a non-animatronic head like that, you have to realize that movements that you make as a human being may not register outside with this huge costume, or conversely, a little move that you make as a human being could be a very big move with a big head on your shoulders. So you have to adjust to that. And I learned a lot of those skills as an actor on the stage, and then I translated them and adapted them to the work that was required for the suits, and then later on for the performance capture.
And especially with Michelangelo, who's it's a pretty physical role as well. I mean, you have to move pretty much like a ninja in a suit that's probably, I don't know how much it weighed, but at least probably what, 100 pounds easy.
It started out at about 50, 60 pounds, and then after 20 minutes, you had sweated up the foam latex, so it weighed more like 70 pounds.
Oh, Jesus. So, I mean, how did you manage that the physicality of all that jumping and moving in a suit that did not look easy to maneuver in?
It was not easy. None of them were. It was hard. It was physically demanding work. In fact, we would be totally exhausted at the end of each day. Um, yeah, of course, you could eat anything you wanted because you worked it off immediately. But yeah, it was difficult work. You had to be very, very strong to survive physically. But then again, there was the other side of that coin too, because not everybody can be inside of a suit or a head like that. We had glaring examples of some people who came to us, and we thought that they would work out, but once they got inside of a head or a suit, they found that they couldn't deal with that, and it's an emotional thing for some people. So yeah, it takes a lot of strength, and a lot of strength of will.
I mean, I imagine it's quite claustrophobic in those suits. Like, did you know if you were or were not claustrophobic at that moment? I mean, how did you? That's a hell of a time to find out that you are.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Some people didn't know until they actually got inside a suit
Right.
that they were claustrophobic. Yeah, it became, for me, now everybody that I know of who was a person in a suit had similar experiences to varying degrees. But for me, I would be fine as long as you could breathe. That was the main thing. The oxygen was important. Sometimes we didn't have enough. A lot of time we didn't have enough. But it became for me when I would get to that point, because there would always come a point eventually. You could stave it off for as long as you could,
Mm.
but eventually you would come to a point where you're just like, I have to get out of this place now, please. And a little bit of panic sets in. And at that point, I would go what I called go to the Bahamas. I would disassociate my mind from the pain that I was feeling. And I would say, oh, isn't it lovely here? Look at the lovely beach, the waves. I would take myself to another place.
Now, was there at least a cooling system inside the suit to help you guys out a little bit?
Oh, no, we tried that once during Turtles. I was always the experimental turtle. When they had an idea, they said, let's try it on him, see if it works. Yeah. In this case, we were trying out. There was a cooling vest that had been created for the astronauts and for race car drivers. And in this case, it was one of the units. Some unit used air. This used water, and it would circulate water. You would put on this vest that had little tubes running all the way through it, woven into it, and it would pump water through these little tubes, and that would the theory being that that's what would cool your core by dissipating the heat, which worked fine for astronauts and for race car drivers. But what I found, because again, experimental turtle, they they told me to do some of your martial arts stuff for about 5 minutes, get cooking up really good, and then we'll try the unit and see if it cools you down. Well, right on the unit that has the pump, it says in very large letters, do not put ice in this chest. Someone had put ice in the chest. So I'm doing my stuff and getting all cooking and warm and hot. And then they flicked it on, and ice cold water pumped around my body
Oh,
immediately.
shit.
And my body just went zip, and I was locked. I was absolutely locked. They could have killed me, but they didn't, thank God. But yeah, we decided that maybe we shouldn't. We should follow instructions where it says do not do something. We should not do that. So
Point.
we
Took a
did
good,
try
good
it.
turn.
We did try it for a week or two on set, but the problem was that the way this technology was set up, you had an additional thing coming off your body, the hose for the vest, and you couldn't have it plugged in during the scene, of course, and you couldn't use it during the physical scenes. It would be during the dialogue scenes mostly, the dialogue shots, but you couldn't use it until they yelled cut, and then they would plug it in, and you would get
Mm.
some cooling effect for the few seconds between shots. So it wasn't really practical for our purposes in the end.
Mm. And the other thing I can imagine it would be hard to learn too is that once again you're used to your body and how much space you have, but now you're in a suit that's much wider and longer. How did you kind of just figure out how much space you had to work in and live in when you're in a suit much larger than yourself?
Well,
Especially with the
in the
shell.
case of turtles, they were sculpted to our body cast, so they were skin tight. The actual thing that you see on the outside, of course, was the sculpt that was created around our body cast, but they fitted us skin tight. Dinosaurs, on the other hand, was a small cottage that you climbed into, because the only thing that really was tight to your skin were the arms and hands and the bottom half of your legs were in something that was up against your skin. Everything else was much looser because it had been built out and structured out so that you were inside of it as opposed to wearing it on top of your skin.
Mm. How did that affect you as an actor when you once again have that restriction in movement, having to also get used to the fact that you're a lot wider with the turtle shell than, or especially with Charlene eventually too, with the tail, than your normal, and everyone else is having the same problem. The fact that the odds of you guys not just ramming into each other through every scene is a little
Yeah,
shocking.
we had more than one traffic accident, let me tell you. Yeah, um, every suit has its limitations. And part of your job, a very important part of your job, is to find out how you can get your performance out of those limitations. With the dinosaur suit, exactly. You were dealing with a bulk that was way beyond what you're accustomed to as a human being. So there was many times we were bumping into set pieces and knocking one and each other over. We had a game that we played once we got accustomed and comfortable with them, where we would run up and whip our tails around and smack each other with the tails. Yeah, but the costume department was not very pleased with that, so we didn't do that too often, or at least not when they were around.
So, and how about for visual cue? I mean, the eyes look like they were computer. I mean, so where were you looking out of?
Well, in the case of turtles, we had two ways to see out. We had two little, you know, the eraser at the end of a pencil.
Yeah.
Okay, we had two little holes about that big, as big as an eraser, right below the bandanas. So if the bandana didn't slide down, which they did sometimes, and block your vision, you could see kind of out in that direction there. And then when the animatronic mouth was open, you could see down just maybe 2 feet in front of your feet. And that's all you could see. Everything else was closed off. So what we would do, particularly with turtles, and we use this method on dinosaurs too, we would rehearse one rehearsal at least with the head off, so that we could see everything that we needed to see in the world. Especially if you're doing fight choreography, you need to see where the punches are coming, where kicks are coming, and things like that. And we would choreograph so that we knew exactly just how far we could go before there would be a foot there, or just how far we could go and put with our punch before we would hit somebody. So that's how we choreographed everything. And then we would put the head on and muscle memory would take over.
That's crazy. Like, I can't imagine how to even function like that. Because I mean, even when you see things in a practice, I mean, do you have that kind of muscle memory to know where you're in that space again? I just, that's amazing.
That's why it wasn't a job for everybody.
Well, like I said, you get to play Michelangelo, which was one of the favorite characters, and I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, especially the first one. It was such an amazing film. And
Thank
I
you.
will say, being that they've been making movies now with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for 30 something years now, 34 years now, it's still the best one of them all, but
Thank
by
you.
far the best. And I think part of it, I think is because the costume still, I think it holds up as the best one out of all the ones that came out, because they made the big guys in the what was it, the Michael Bay, like big turtles, and they made the ones in 2 and 3 that made a little more animated. But these always, that one, the first one, always looked the best, and I thought that was
Thank you.
absolutely incredible.
I thank you. I agree 100%.
So
In fact, I never bought an action figure of Michelangelo because they looked like the cartoon versions, the animated
yeah,
versions, and that wasn't me. And then finally they came out with the one that's exactly what I looked like.
and that is the best scene, when the nunchuck scene, when he's going against the other nunchuck, and then they're challenging each other. That was
Yeah.
such a wonderful, that's genius right there.
And they're genius too because they gave you the option of having that hand
Oh,
with the
really?
nunchuck up there. Yeah, so I got that option.
So I imagine because you had to spin that nunchuck too. I assume you were doing it basically blind, not knowing exactly what you're, just guessing where it was when you were swirling it around like that.
Again, rehearsal with the head off, a lot of rehearsal. With the nunchucks, they gave us, it was at least 3 months, it may have been four. They gave us a period of time once we were cast to be the Turtles. Uh, who was still there? Leaf, Tilden, Josh Pice, and myself were all New York actors. So we had a sensei in New York that they sent us to, and we had training every week. We had martial arts training where we would be taught the techniques, and then we had weapons training where one of us would go in individually each week for one day of weapons training. So I would go in to practice the nunchucks, and then they gave me practice chucks to take home. Unfortunately, the first chucks they gave me were still the wooden chucks that I would end up using in the film. So I was beating the hell out of myself for about 2 weeks until a box arrived one day and it said practice chucks, and they were made of rubber.
Nice, good of them to do that for you.
Yeah, eventually.
So, practicing with the nunchucks, were you practicing in costume? Because assuming that changed things when you're in costume.
Yeah, no, all of the stuff in New York was without costume. The costumes were being built. They had flown us to London right after we were cast to have our body cast taken. And then we came back from wherever we were going. I was going back to New York. And they were creating the costumes while we were training in New York. Then when we got to no, there was a fitting. I beg your pardon. There was a time that once they had the costumes almost ready into the end stages of creating them, they flew us back to London so we could have another fitting, so they could get the final fittings proper. And then they created the string of costumes after that. Each one of the hero turtles, we had, I think, 13 or 14 costumes each, because they were foam latex and we would just tear them up during the shooting. You know, when you're doing all the martial arts stuff, you're tearing off pieces of foam latex everywhere. So they were constantly repairing them every night. So we had to have that many suits just to get the filming done each day.
So the other challenge that you've had is that as the performer, you had someone else doing the face animatronics. You had someone who's going to do the voice. Robbie Rest did Michelangelo. When you
Mhm.
were on set, were you doing the voice and doing the dialogue for the character, or or did you just skip ahead without dialogue?
It depended on who your puppeteer partner was. In my case, I was working with a brilliant and wonderful fellow named Mac Wilson, a Brit, and the way he and I worked together was that we would both be speaking the dialogue when we were working. Excuse me. When we were actually shooting, I would say it to myself because I couldn't speak out loud in case
Yeah.
they would catch it on the microphone, right? So he would always speak the dialogue into the microphone that would be recorded, and that would become the track that Robbie would then record over. So he would get the rhythms of the scene from Max reading that we shot live, and then he would record over and put his own juice into it.
So when you think about your performance, how did you keep in mind a voice that wasn't being spoken by the actual actor and animatronics you couldn't see controlling your face, but yet you had to make it all look so completely natural that that most of us, I think even myself when I first watched it, just assumed the guy who's doing the voice was the guy in the suit. You know, like the assumption was just there. I was like, Robbie Riss, whoever the guy was, must be the actor, and he's speaking from the suit. So how did
It's a
you? Right.
natural assumption. Yeah. The way Mac and I worked was, I mean, we were both from the theater to begin with, so we were actors first before we became, in his case, a brilliant puppeteer. Um, we worked like an actor would work, so that we worked very hard on getting the intention of the scene, the rhythm of the dialogue, of course, in conjunction with Steve Barron, the director, whoever was directing at the time. And so we knew everything that we needed to know about how we were going to deliver these lines, the intention, the rhythm, the pace, so that when we came to shoot it, both Mac and I knew 100% what was going to happen. Now, we left open the possibility of slight inflections and changes on the fly, but that was rare. It's much more common when you're doing a puppet yourself that you can improvise, where it's much more difficult when you're trying to improvise with two people at the same instant in time. But
Mm.
we got to the point, on all of the pairings got to the point where you could do that. We were so in tune with one another that if one decided to do a slightly different thing, if I did a different move or decided to do a different body position, Mac was right there with me.
That's awesome. Now, I also read that you were the pizza guy too in the first movie. Is that correct?
Yes, Steve was really sweet. He said I had been doing a lot of like experimental turtle things like that, so I'd been contributing a lot as much as I could to the production. And he said, as a little reward, we're going to give you a cameo, and that's how I became Tony the pizza guy. I deliver pizza to myself as Michelangelo, and then stiff myself on the tip.
That is awesome. Do people recognize you still as the pizza guy from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
They do, which is really sweet.
For a cameo. It was a wicked funny scene. And knowing that you're both Michelangelo and the pizza guy, that was been really fun.
It was, and in fact, uh, in the first movie, Josh got a cameo too as a guy in the back seat of a taxi cab in New York as Raphael goes diving across the cab. Um, but the other guys wanted their own cameos, so in the second movie, everybody got a cameo.
That's awesome. And like I said, well, I think the first one is my favorite. Secret of the Ooze, it was a good follow-up, and it had a very different look to it. The costume was
Yeah.
different. So how did that impact or change how you perform based on what the new suit was like?
Well, what happened basically was that in certain places, particularly in the United Kingdom, the violence of the first movie turned some people off. Excuse me. So what they did was they changed the whole tenor and feeling of the movie. The first movie was very close to the comic books and what Peter and Kevin had originally created. And I was very pleased with that, and everybody was. We liked that. Because of the reaction, things changed and it became much more of it was written much more for a younger audience. Instead of teenage and up, it was more teenage and younger. And that was the flair and the feeling of the second movie. It was much more comic. You notice because of laws in Britain, they wouldn't allow my nunchucks to even be seen. So I had holsters for the nunchucks in the second movie, and I never used them. But we came up with the combat cold cuts in the shopping mall scene so that I could have some sort of nunchucks going on during the movie. But otherwise, you never see my nunchucks in the second movie.
I didn't even notice that. That's weird. I never noticed he never used them in that entire movie.
Yep, that was the reason why.
Now did they at least make the suits updated? Because at least they are definitely more cartoon looking. Were they different in how they were built, constructed?
The biggest change for us, and it was a huge change for us, was that the first movie, the motors for all of the animatronics were, except for one motor, were on a steel plate on our backs, like we wore like a big backpack underneath the shell, and they had bicycle brake cables running up from all of the motors into the head to the mechanism. So when you take the head off, you could take the head off and rest it on your shoulders or hold it, but you couldn't take it off because of the bicycle cables connecting it to the motors. So you would be stuck there with that. After a while, our dressers would come and give us a spell and hold it and that kind of thing. But it was a pain. Between the first and second movie, they decided to fix that, and they made all of the coupling electronic so that it was a big, huge, stonking great electronic coupling about that big around with all sorts of connections. But they could disconnect the head and take it off. So you could put her aside. That was a big change for us. That was the biggest change, believe me. It changed a little bit cosmetically. They did some more modeling with the skin painting on the turtles for the second movie. You can actually see their little dots and stuff much clearer in the second suits than you can in the first. Also, the lighting was much brighter in the second movie, like you say, a little more cartoony. So yeah, that was basically the changes for us in the suit as actors, as the guys inside the suits, and the look was a bit more brilliant and light as well.
So, like I said, the first two movies, as I mentioned, aged better, I think, than any other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie. And in many ways, the 1991 felt like it was ahead of its time of what comic book movies were going to turn into. In other words, a serious take on comic book property. So why do you think they've held up so well 30 years later, and why they have not been able to be repeated in the multiple attempts they've tried to redo this franchise?
Well, I think they hold up because the themes are universal. It's the four brothers. It's the unity. It's the strength in numbers. They can't always overcome the challenge individually, but together they usually can, or they can come up with an idea that can allow them to overcome the challenge. So I think that's one of the really important reasons why it lasts. And I have the privilege of talking with fans all of these years, especially since I started doing the conventions. And the stories they tell me almost universally have to deal with there was some difficulty in their personal lives that the turtles helped them get through by watching the example of that kind of unity and love. And that's the privilege of being a turtle. That's the best part of being a turtle, let me tell you.
And
Now,
oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, sir.
Well, that's the reason why I think that they hold up. What was the other part? It was to go along with that. It was how do they hold up? Why do they hold up?
Oh, well, why do you think they had not been able to repeat the
Ah,
quality of that first attempt?
now that I think, and this is my personal opinion, but I think it's true. That comes down to the creative people who were involved in creating the first movie to begin with, and the fact that it was a new adventure for everybody involved. It was a new adventure for Jim and his company. This was something that he had wanted to do, but hadn't had the project to do it on yet. They had touched a little bit on it in a series called The Storyteller, if you're familiar with that. That was the beginning of the animatronics for his performance, but he wanted to take it to the next step, and this project allowed him to do that. So he was approaching it with a very juiced up and excited, and everybody was. Steve Barron was excited. The producers were excited. Everybody was excited. I think that's why the energies and the juice that got poured into that first movie. That's why it can't be recreated, because it was a very special
Mm.
moment in the universe.
And the other thing I think as well is that, there's something to be said about having the actual costumes versus the CGI work. That no matter how good the CGI is, it still doesn't look. It's kind of it is fun in a way that these costumes that in many ways obviously are not real in any way, shape, or form, but somehow still look and feel more genuine than the CGI effects they've tried to pull off later on.
That's a comment I've heard for years from lots and lots of people, and it's true. I feel the same way when I watch a movie today. Now, granted, CGI has gotten so much better than it was at that time, or even for the turtle movies that followed immediately or shortly thereafter that went CGI. But even though it still has a tendency to take you out of
Yeah.
the experience. Whereas live action, when it's happening there and the people who are in the scene with the same characters are relating to that, and it's not looking at a tennis ball on the end of a stick, it has a different flavor, a different feel. And I think that's what you're referring to.
And it was terrific. And like I said, you were in another the Dinosaur show. I love it. Me and my wife binged it not too long ago. I didn't even realize that you were Charlene at the time when I was tried to go back and binge it. It's just one of those shows I just loved, and it was
Thank you.
on Disney.
I'm
Um,
very proud of that show.
it was so far ahead of its time, and it was far more clever than you would think when you first started
Yeah.
watching this. They made a reference to it. I can't remember what it was where they said about talking about the subtleties of being these deep messages in this kids TV show. They were right, and it was so smart. And you got to like I said, you're Charlene. What was that like? And also, once again, you're playing a teenage girl. How did that also change your performance?
Well, I had to get in touch with my young girl. We all have different facets of our personality, and I had to call her up. It was a lot of fun. The thing with dinosaurs was that besides the additional perk that was being trained as and performing as a puppeteer, was that Charlene was a challenge in that Charlene was always going to be Charlene. Now they gave her wonderful development over the course of the four seasons, which was great because she was always going to be Charlene. Whereas I also was in a little brown turtle guy suit who was initially Sid Turtlepuss, which was Earl's next door neighbor and also one of the guys that worked with him at the tree pushing plant. Um, but because that was a versatile suit and he didn't need to just be Sid Turtlepuss, I got a chance to play a lot of different characters in that suit. I was I was state troopers. I was TV ad executives. I was all sorts of characters. So that's was one of the things that kept me happy because I kept doing new things each episode
Mhm.
in that suit, as well as playing Sid when he was appropriate. And then the rest of the time I was inside of Charlene and really dealing with whatever new adventure and development they had for her.
Yeah, did you realize how smart the show was when you were doing it? Did it just feel like they were doing something that was in many ways 20 years probably too early for television at that time.
Yeah, it was ahead of its time in many ways. You're right. No, we knew because we would have the table readings and we would hear these wonderful scripts. We would laugh our butts off because it was so funny. So we knew we had great material going in. And of course, that's half the battle right there. It's in the words and what they give you to play. And then the rest of it is how you interpret it. But yeah, we knew it was a funny damn show.
And the part that's kind of funny about it is that it got canceled almost every season, almost before they kept getting saved.
Yeah.
I really wonder what they would have done if they could have kept the show running, because sort of like the animation, they could have kept those characters going technically forever because the animatronics would not have aged.
Yeah, and in fact, we had intended and they had planned and had developed a script for a feature film. Yeah, it was all set to go after the fourth season, and then we got canceled, and then they said, nah, that's it. What happened basically, and why it kept going away at the end and finally went away, was that, as often happens, there was a regime change at Disney. And so some of the people who had been responsible for bringing dinosaurs to life in the first place were no longer there. And therefore, that support was gone. So that's primarily at the end of the fourth season why we got canceled. But we thought for sure we were going to get a chance to do the feature film because, like you say, that could have continued on into an animated spin-off. It could have been so many different things, or just continuing a really good TV show. But we were an expensive TV show, and that was the other side of that coin. When we first started out, we were the most expensive half hour on TV. We got really good over the seasons so that we cut down the cost. So that was, I think, in the first season, we were in the million, maybe just over $1 million per episode. That was the cost. And by the fourth season, we were down around 700,000, 600,000 per episode.
So,
They were happy about that, but not happy enough.
but now
Not
I'm
happy
curious
enough.
about, like, did you see the script for the film? I mean, did you see what was the discussion? What was it going to be about?
Don't know too many of the details. We saw a 2-page treatment initially
Yeah.
at the time, and then they said, "Oh, the script's being developed," and then we never got never got to see the completed script.
Because the last episode of the series ends with the world coming to an end. So
Yeah.
could this have taken place after that? Like, what they possibly were going to do after that? I mean, that kind of kills what's going to happen next at that point.
Well, the script was being developed before the word came down that we were canceled, and when the word came down that we were canceled, that's when the ending that we ended up with became a possibility.
I'm curious. Can you share anything about the treatment that you read?
I can't recall enough of
Gotcha.
it because it was very, very bare bones at that time. I'd love to know more. I'm sure maybe Brian has a copy of it someplace, but yeah, no, I don't have anything more to give you on that. Sorry.
No worries. So you've been able to frequent comic book conventions thanks to your association with Coolwater Productions. That also helped got you on the show for me, so I thank him a great deal. So how has Coolwater Productions helped you to appear at these conventions? What have those experiences been like for you?
Well, that is their business. That's Derek Mackey and his family, Coolwater Productions, and they're excellent, wonderful people. But they were friends for 5 or 6 years before anything with the conventions happened. They had approached me early on when we became friends, and I wasn't interested. I had this thing. I didn't want to sell my autograph. I would sign autographs for people, but I didn't want to sell them.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that. And then eventually, after about 4 or 5 years, Derek convinced me. He said, bottom line, this isn't about you. This is about the people who want to meet you.
Yeah.
And I thought for a minute, well, yeah, that actually makes sense. So I said, okay, I'll try one. Well, the experience, like I say, the best part of being a turtle is the fans. And the experience was so wonderful after the first one. I said, okay, I will do more of these. And I was doing a number of them up until the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, of course, we weren't going to be doing any of those, and I didn't want to be doing them anyway because of that problem. And then after the pandemic, eased and started to do them again, I still wasn't up for the travel. But then just last year, Derek said, it's time for you to get back out again, and so he booked me for some this year. So I've had my first one since the pandemic for me in Elkhart, Indiana, a few weeks back, and it was marvelous. And I'm looking forward to the other ones I have this year.
That's
But
awesome.
those are the people who got me involved, and that's how I got involved.
So for autographs, is it the first movie, the second movie, or Dinosaurs that gets the most requests?
It's a mix. It's a mix, and it also includes my appearances on Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek and other things as well. So it's a mix. I would say initially it was maybe 70% Turtles and 30% spread around the rest of the stuff out there for me, and now it's probably half and half.
But that is awesome. So what is next for you?
Next for me is I'm enjoying myself. The show that I had last worked on last year, Muppets Mayhem, won an Emmy, and we thought, okay, we're going to get a second, and they said no second season. So at this point, I've rediscovered the joy of travel. So I'm doing more of that than I ever have. I realized at one point that I hadn't taken a vacation for 50 years. And I thought, oh, maybe I should try some of that. And I have, and I really enjoy it. So because the work isn't going to be there isn't going to be a project to work on. I do still pitch on friends' projects, but that's non-gratis. That's just for helping out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to new adventures and new challenges that don't involve getting inside of a rubber suit.
That's all, Mr. Sisti. It's been an absolute honor to speak with you, sir. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure, Jeff, and it was lovely meeting you.
Have a fantastic day, sir.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Special thanks to Coolwaters Productions for making this episode a reality. Be sure to return for the next episode when Matt and Brendan Wagner board the mothership to discuss Grendel, Devil's Crucible, Defiance from Dark Horse Comics. Until next voyage, travel on.